Or if you look at the GDP of America is like $14–15 trillion a year, while Mexico's only 1.5 trillion. But it can be argued that Mexico has just as many billionaires as America, because the way billionaires are calculated by Forbes and other groups like that, like the UN, blah blah blah, is by calculating what's known about people. Like this person's known investments, these are his assets, his income, blah blah blah, and they can say this person's a billionaire. So when you talk about the drug market, which is a $400 billion a year market in America, a lot of our gross, our GDP, gross domestic product, which is all the goods and services, how much they're worth when all is said and done, how much money is made, and you look at it, it's like a 30th of it is spent on drugs. And there's no real monopoly on that market, so to speak, as far as how the money is spread out. When they calculated Chapo Guzman's assets and things of that nature, they came up with he was the only last time I checked, he was the only drug dealer on their list that was a billionaire. And to me that was kind of funny, that they would think that there's these huge drug wars in Mexico, but none of these other guys are making any money, because they don't really know, how it really works, and how some of these guys got, storehouses full of cash. You'd think they would know, because they intercept loads of cash coming over the border sometimes, So, but anyway, it's pretty much how the world is presented to you and how it really is. It can be different sometimes. Now, if you look at the history of Babylon, let me read you from the history of Babylon. I'll put the site in my sources later. I forgot what the site is. I didn't write it down, but I'll recognize it when I look for it again. But anyway, it says Babylon was a city-state in southern Mesopotamia during Old Testament times, which eventually became a large empire that absorbed the nation of Judah and destroyed Jerusalem. History: the city of Babylon was founded in unknown antiquity on the river Euphrates, about 50 miles south of modern Baghdad. The English names Babylon and Babel, Genesis 10:10, Genesis 11:9, are translated from the same Hebrew word Babel. See Babel. Babylon may have been an important cultural center during the period of the early Sumerian city-states before 2000 BC, but the corresponding archaeological levels of the site are below the present water table and remain unexplored. Babylon emerged from anonymity shortly after 2000 BC, a period roughly contemporary with the Hebrew patriarchs. At that time, an independent kingdom was established in the city under a dynasty of Semitic Westerners or Amorites. Hammurabi, 1792 to 1750 BC, the sixth king of the first dynasty of Babylon, built a sizable empire through treaties, vassalage, and conquest. From his time forward, Babylon was considered the political seat of southern Mesopotamia, the region called Babylonian. So when Babylon really starts emerging as an empire, it's like over 1,000 years, almost 1,500 years after Egypt has an empire. So it's like, what are we talking about here? Obviously, these people didn't have their stuff together to apply religion in that fashion. So you got to understand, the empire implies that your religion has been established for such a long time that you're able to use it to rule over a large group of people from different tribes. That's what an empire is. That's how old and well established your religion is. Because the first dynasty of Egypt isn't when the Egyptian religion sprung up. It sprung up tens of thousands of years before that, most likely, in its very primitive form, and then it evolved like every other religion. So the only reason I started with Egypt is because that's where it makes sense to start. It doesn't make sense because they're black like me. I didn't start it for the same reason the white man starts history usually with the Romans and the Greeks. I did it because that's where you have a lot of the archaeological evidence that tells us the story, and that's that empire from back in the day, There's more Egyptian artifacts, for example, than the Indus Valley civilization artifacts. we know more about the Egyptian language last time I checked. Now, I'm not an expert on this. I'm not sure exactly, but I'm pretty sure that the Indus Valley civilization, the language and the symbols that they used, we never deciphered them as much as we've deciphered Egyptian hieroglyphs. So, it doesn't make sense to start it with the Babylonian mysteries. You have to start it with the Egyptian mysteries to understand the Babylonian mysteries. You know what I mean? And when you look at the Bible and who was able to challenge the prophets of God on a spiritual level, it was the Egyptians. They were the only ones who were able to do it. You had like seers, and you had other people who had spiritual contact, but they didn't really make an impression in the Bible because they weren't meant to. The Egyptians were the masters of magic. They were the masters of the spiritual world. And my argument has always been that nobody understood the spiritual world and in its entirety as much as the Egyptians. Nobody was even thinking that you got to prepare for death. You got to prepare your soul for the afterlife. They weren't thinking that way. They were thinking about living their life. Like, there were some people who believed, in Valhalla, things like this, some European groups of people, some Scandinavians and things of this nature. And they believed that they died in combat, that they would go to Valhalla, a warrior's heaven and what have you. But they didn't prepare their bodies in the way the Egyptians did. They didn't build huge pyramids and take it to that level. Nobody did. Nobody took it to that level because they weren't that fanatical about it, and they didn't invent it themselves. It was kind of something that they had adopted as their culture, but it was fake. It was a lie. It wasn't their culture. It never was their culture. It was a whitewash of African culture. It's their white perspective of African culture. The idea that cultures evolve separately and independently with no contact at all and no influence at all from other cultures is the most racist, pathetic, discriminatory, biased point of view one can possibly have. It's counterintuitive. It makes no sense at all. Like a people would migrate and not keep any aspect of the culture and the religion that they had before. Makes no sense. Every religion that is new is explained in terms of the old religion because they're borrowing from the old religion. And it's that simple. End of story.